Homophobia and Aquinas' Natural Law by Matthew Rales. The long-standing Catholic Church continues to perpetuate virtue theory and sexual ethics from a philosophical religious doctrine created by a single person from the medieval 13th century. The natural law developed by Thomas Aquinas is a precedent for the continued ignorance and hatred towards homosexuality by not only the Catholics but most sects of modern Christianity. To even delve into this controversy with any sense of rationality, one must leave their untestable theories of God and divinity at the door. The demise in this theory can range from Aquinas' influence to its loopholes or to Christianity's own hypocrisy. The intrinsic nature of humans is a question that most intellectuals of today would certainly consider unanswered. Christianity and Aquinas believe they found the answer to the meaning of life and natural tendencies through these four simple laws. 1. We are obliged to preserve our own lives. 2. We are obliged to procreate within marriage. 3. We are obliged to live as good citizens among other people. And 4. We are obliged to seek knowledge primarily about God and His creation. The matter at hand for this instance would be the second law: we are obliged to procreate within marriage. To further understand the perspective from which these arbitrary rules were established, you must first understand who Aquinas was as an individual. In the Kingdom of Sicily, in the town of Roccasecca, Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225 Common Era. He was one of 9 children in a high-class family who owned their own castle in the name of the Aquino family. From his birth, his parents believed him to be destined to a life of piety and religious servitude that would bring more political power to the family. His early years were spent learning at the Abbey of Monte Cassino until he was about 15. Eventually, in 1239, Aquinas would go on to begin his formal studies of theology and philosophy at the University of Naples. It was here that he would be introduced to the works of Aristotle and his virtue theory that were just recently translated. Thomas was soon introduced to the order of preachers, better known as the Dominicans, who took on an evangelical approach to religion by going past limits to do what was necessary to spread the faith. This change in intentions displeased his family, who had put him under house arrest for disobeying their wishes. In 1245, his family released him back to the Dominicans, and Thomas would actually live a life of dedication to his family despite the past discord. Dominican authorities then sent him to the University of Paris under St. Albert, where he became a teacher of the sentences. By 1256, Thomas was the university's master of theology. In the back-and-forth politics, he would go from Naples and Paris for various lengths of time. In 1273, he would finish his most renowned work, Summa Theologia, a treatise of sacraments. A year later, Thomas would die in Fasanova, Italy, on his way to the Second Council of Lyon as a theological consultant. When Thomas Aquinas first began studying at the University of Naples, he was introduced to what is considered to be his greatest virtue and teleological influencer by Peter of Ireland. This is of course referring to Aristotle. Thomas was one of the first and few Christian influencers that found reasoning in classical Greek philosophy commonly deemed as heresy by the Church. Aristotle's contemplative studies on purpose, or teleology, sought to find how to live a virtuous life alongside nature. Aquinas took his theory and applied divinity to it as to make his opinion a testament of God's will. Aristotle simply said that all things have a purpose in this universe and can all be explained in the cycle of life. It is noted that he never mentions God or putting God's will above human action. It is here that Aquinas begins his deviation from the original intentions of the philosophy. To be more specific in regards to homophobia, he turns Aristotle's theory of natural purpose and says that homosexuality goes against the purpose of sexual organs under God's will. On top of this, we see a certain pick-and-choose system as commonly seen by hateful Christians when they refer to parts of the Bible, where Aquinas only chose to use the parts of Aristotle logic that fit with the church at the time and would consider the rest as lost in translation or any number of other excuses. Understanding the detrimental influence of Thomas Aquinas requires a look at the relationship of homosexuality and Christianity before his religious doctrine. Before the coming of Christianity as a major faith, homosexuality was generally accepted in Greek and Roman cultures. During early Christianity, the writers of the Bible did something similar to that of Aquinas in condemning homosexuality as an abomination and then putting it down as the holiest and unarguable of doctrine. During the first millennium Common Era, there was fervent fear and supposed danger of same-sex encounters. Writings by Tertullian, Ambrosiaster, and John Chrysostom detailed how defiant these acts were to nature. A Christian rite known as adelphophaesis is controversially considered to be a religious pathway through which two men could unite in what many considered a marriage. While a rite such as that progressed acceptance of homosexuals, new laws calling for the death of them were in development. Coming into the second millennium, a level of tolerance was coming to fruition and a long silence by the Church. This silence would later be defended by the Church, claiming it was working on more important things. During this time, there was still the occasional writing of condemnation by St. Peter Damian or Hildegarde of Bingen, which began to address lesbianism, but the organized church was still in a period of blind tolerance. That catches you up to the 13th century, where Thomas Aquinas would work to bring back Christianity's opinion to the past millennium and fuel rhetoric from even today's many sects of religion. Thomas Aquinas lived a very influential life, but his natural law lived on to play a much larger and longer role in Christianity. While many writers of the past homophobic doctrines lived on as long as their generation, it was the veneration of Thomas's name and works into the modern era that have enthralled such divisive works seen today. On the 18th of July, 1323, Pope John XXII canonized Thomas a saint while seated in Avignon. In 1567, he was considered a doctor of the Church by Pope St. Pius V. Thomas was continually held up as a supreme Christian philosopher, one referenced in Aeterni Patris by Pope Leo XIII in 1879. He is honored by the Church of Jacobins in Toulouse and a yearly feast on the 28th of January by Catholics and Anglicans alike. So the Church still holds him and the natural laws high after nearly 800 years with absolutely no amendment. Yet almost on a constant basis does the Catholic Church put out new doctrine and agendas to keep the Church with the realistic times of today. When dissecting the work of Aquinas, you can find clear logical flaws. The natural laws have been insisting that no part of your body is to be used in any way contrary to its natural purpose. It is here we encounter the walking on your hands argument. If a person was to say, walk on their hands like a gymnast, then according to Aquinas' doctrine, that is just as much a sin as sexually misusing parts of your body. This again adds to the pick and choose system perpetuated by Christianity. The natural law even goes as far as to say we should not use objects for anything other than their intentions. This could be exemplified as using a sweater as a hat, just another silly loophole in how things follow God's will. In a bigger sense than just Aquinas, an analyzation of church hypocrisies sheds more light on the oddity of the subject. In a quite broad sense, when reading the Bible, an understanding is reached that God is loving, forgiving, and accepting, and so should its followers. Looking at examples of conversion therapy, hate crimes, familial beatings, in churches such as the Westboro Baptist Church, you get a much different picture of what Christianity actually is in reality to what it says it is. A huge example of hypocrisy is of the molestations of young boys by some of its highest-ranking members. These actions go beyond homosexuality into something far worse. Yet, if two grown men want to love each other and live together happily, this is unnatural or an abomination. While the church is riddled with these situations, they still think of themselves as being on the moral high ground for continuing to follow the natural laws of Thomas Aquinas as they so choose. In closing, the natural law developed by Thomas Aquinas is to blame for the majority of continued ignorance and hatred towards homosexuality as seen through organized Christianity when addressing the faults in referencing Aristotle's virtue theory, holes in what should be a sound argument, and lax application in times of scandal. Beyond the harm caused to the LGBT community, there is another result of a male-dominated encroachment onto women's abortive and contraceptive rights. The grossly flawed work of a man from an era of academic darkness in the medieval period has been continued for hundreds of years to continue on an agenda of misunderstanding and unsubstantiated morals. The virtue theory and teleology of Aristotle was taught as a higher thinking of purpose, and Aquinas labels his thoughts as that of Aristotle's, yet takes away the backbone of logic and reasoning to continue a demeaning pathway for the next centuries of Catholicism and many other followers of the Christian faith. This terrible flaw leaves many heads of religion to blame and is not always the same understanding of every follower, and this negativity does not reflect onto all Christians. Many follow a path of compassion and reason and have contributed greatly to progressing the acceptance of homosexuals, and need not be the target of this controversial matter.